Humanity Matters.
I'm your host, Ken Schachter, joined by my co-host, Bernie Furshpan.
Hello, Ken.
And on today's episode of Disrupting Hate on HMTV, we'll be joined by my guest, Ellen Kennedy, CEO of World Without Genocide, based in Minneapolis, Minnesota. World Without Genocide's mission statement calls for it to protect innocents from discrimination and violence, prevent genocide, and prosecute crimes against humanity. Welcome, Ellen. And
thank you. I'm honored to be with you today.
Ellen, just to start, can you share a bit with how you first became engaged in the study of genocide and what motivates you to continue that work?
It really began when I was in first grade. A little boy, one of my classmates, pulled me aside one day and he said, "What's your nationality?" And I said, "I'm an American." He said, "No, you're not. You're a Jew." And I was really taken aback by that. And that really made a lasting impression on me. And it was a status of being othered that I truly have thought about and dealt with and felt challenged by, not only for me, but for others who feel that way as well. As my life went on, I became a professor, and wherever I traveled, I was very interested in finding out what had happened to Jewish people in that region. I grew up in a small iron ore mining town in northern Michigan, and we were one of only a handful of Jewish families in that town. So I really felt indeed somewhat different, if I can use that word. And I was always very curious about Jewish people in the world. I also grew up in the shadow of World War II. And after I read the Diary of Anne Frank as a young girl, I had what I called my Anne Frank dreams. I dreamed that I was being chased by Nazis, and I would wake up on the verge of being captured with my heart pounding and in a sweat. And I had that dream over and over and over. I never told my parents about it. I just assumed every Jew had that dream. So these issues really were part of my life forever. In 2005, I went to Rwanda. I'd been to many places in the world where there have been terrible atrocities. I've been to concentration camps that had been established during the Holocaust. I've been to the killing fields of Cambodia. I've been to many places in my academic life. And I was in Rwanda that summer because I had been teaching about the genocide in Rwanda, and I was eager to learn more about transitional justice there. Again, that genocide was 1994, and I was there in 2005. Everywhere I went, of course, people shared their stories with me. And when I came back the following fall, I was teaching about the Rwandan genocide, but teaching about it with a renewed connection because of having been there, met people, seen memorial tributes throughout the country. And one of my students came to me after class and said, "What are we going to do about this?" Meaning crises like these in the world. And I thought I had been doing a great deal, teaching my students. I built a whole university program around social justice and outreach and so on. But her question to me was truly a challenge. What are we going to do in the world? And I thought about it for a very long time. And shortly thereafter, after thinking and wondering and struggling, that's when I created World Without Genocide. And that was 20 years ago.
So let me ask you a question about the term genocide today from its original definition, which was what, in 1947 maybe, when they defined it? In today's modern context, has it changed in any way?
Well, that's a very difficult and very important question. And I want to begin first with how that word and the convention were created. They were created by people from many different countries coming together. And there was a great deal of discussion and dissent over what should be included in that definition. And finally, the four elements that remain in the Genocide Convention today were those that were agreed upon: that it is the intent to exterminate in whole or in part a racial, national, ethnic, or religious group. So there are many characteristics of identity that are not included in that definition, because even though documents show that some of the other identity characteristics were discussed, many countries stood strongly against them. Political affiliation, for example, which we know was at the heart of the terrible catastrophe in Argentina, 1976 to 1983. So it was a definition in the Genocide Convention that was created by a committee, and we know problems and pitfalls with that. But over the years, the case law surrounding genocide has indeed been altered in what I think is a very significant way, and that is to include both sexual and gender-related crimes. And that has been utterly remarkable. We all know that horrible phrase, rape and pillage, in terms of spoils of war. And yet, because increasingly women have been represented in the judiciaries that are making decisions about these terrible atrocities, sexual and gender-related crimes have come to the fore, and they have been labeled as crimes of genocide. The very first person ever convicted of genocide was a Rwandan, Jean-Paul Akayesu, and his crime was rape. He himself never perpetrated a single rape, but he was the one who incited people in Rwanda to go out and rape women and girls in Rwanda. So the word has changed as case law has changed, as the people involved have really come to reflect and to stand up strongly for the rights and protections of women, girls, and gender expansive people.
In your research, how do you approach the study of individual versus collective responsibility for genocidal acts? Certainly in the wake of World War II, we had individuals who were high up in the chain of command, but are there other ways to look at this?
This whole issue of what becomes prosecuted as genocide, as what we look at as genocide, is extremely disturbing to me. At present, there are 4 international human rights crimes: genocide, war crimes, crimes against humanity, and the crime of aggression. These are all defined in the Rome Statute, the governing treaty of the International Criminal Court, the world's single most important court for adjudicating these types of human rights crimes. And yet that word genocide has become a word so emotionally loaded that it, out of those 4, is the only one that people attend to. And yet, as the great British human rights lawyer Philippe Sands said in a recent interview, the exact same horrors could be perpetrated on a wide group of people, and the legal determination could be that they were crimes against humanity or war crimes, and they would go unnoticed. If the word genocide is attached to them, then there is great attention, there is great furor. We will see demonstrations and outpourings of great concern. So what I always say to people is that when innocent people are being targeted, we must pay attention, regardless of the label that could be affixed to that targeting. And I also want to emphasize that it is never really race, religion, ethnicity, national origin, or other identity issues that are truly at the heart of these kinds of crises. It is always, always, always about power and control. And I like to use the image of an iceberg. Those four identity characteristics that I've mentioned are the ones above the waterline. They're visible in some way. People can be identified and marked with a yellow star, with a blue scarf, with whatever symbol the perpetrators are using. They can be identified, they can be targeted, they can be rounded up and discriminated against. But they are being targeted to rally people against them, to rally support as a way to increase power for a group that desires economic and social control.
Just for my benefit, explain how crimes against humanity is defined as opposed to genocide.
Crimes against humanity is widespread atrocities against a group that cannot be defined by race, religion, ethnicity, or national origin. So it is massive violence against a great number of people, but without that identifying group label, as opposed to genocide that would look at Jews or Roma or Uyghur people or some other characteristic by which a group can be singled out.
I believe these kinds of things have gone on for, throughout humanity. Is the need for tribal survival hardwired into Homo sapiens, and is tribal warfare some kind of expression of that? I don't know if biologists, that might be more of a biology question, but have you given that some thought?
Whenever there is a struggle over resources, that's when we see these kinds of conflicts. The resources might be food, might be water, might be scarce minerals. The resources might be almost any kind of resource imaginable that is determined to be of value by a particular group. So what we need to do is to be able to say, let's get together and figure out how we can create sustainable peace through some sort of equitable and just division that will eliminate that striving for more and more by one group to the exclusion of another group. We see all of this being exacerbated horribly today by the climate crisis. The climate crisis, which is endangering crops, endangering access to clean water, threatening people's very existence. There were several thousand people in Europe, for example, who died this summer because of terrible heat. 250,000 Pakistanis have just been displaced by floods. Where will they go? 250,000 displaced people. Wherever they go, the people in that environment will feel threatened because resources will become increasingly scarce. So the climate crisis is a force multiplier of violence, of genocide, of crimes against humanity, and so on.
Your organization is very well known for using education. It advocates to build empathy, tolerance, civic responsibility. What can everyday citizens do locally and internationally to take action against discrimination and hate and the potential of genocides?
I think that's a wonderful question, and it's so critical today. If we think about our own neighborhoods, how many of us actually know all the people on our block, especially people who perhaps in some way might be somewhat different from us? It's up to each of us. Ring a doorbell, bring a plate of cookies. It's up to us to teach our children that if a child is sitting alone in the school lunchroom, befriend that child. It begins at the micro level. When we tolerate discrimination, when we tolerate intolerance locally, then we shut our eyes to the kind of violence going on globally. The single worst crisis on the planet right now is the crisis in Sudan, and that is receiving almost no attention in much of the Western media. People close their eyes to crises of people who don't look like them. We saw it in the 1990s with the difference between what happened in former Yugoslavia and in Rwanda. NATO went into former Yugoslavia. Nobody went into Rwanda. And the result was nearly 1 million people slaughtered. So we have to teach and learn and begin to not just tolerate, but to accept and to embrace the people within our own communities. And I say that with such an urgency today. I say that the time is now. Tomorrow it's too late. We are being polarized within our own country, particularly against people who are gender expansive, people who are brown and black, people who are economically disadvantaged, people who are from other countries, people who in some way may be defined as being somehow different. We have to get rid of that distinction, because that distinction, that sense of othering, is the very first in the 10-stage model of genocide that Dr. Gregory Stanton created a number of decades ago. That first stage is classification. How do we divide people? How do we classify them? We must move beyond that.
It sounds to me that if you created a world map of genocide and crimes against humanity, the large countries would be actually within the third world, based on what you're saying, because the world's attention is not focused on the Sudans of the world. Is that about right?
In general, yes. I fear that in general, many people ignore what is loosely called the global south. We pay no attention to it. We disregard it. And we are doing that at such peril because we are connected. Our Jewish values teach us tzedek. They teach us social justice. Tikkun olam, repair of the world. It's not just repair the world for people who look like me. It's repair of the world.
The word genocide has been thrown around, in the Middle East conflict and other conflicts loosely. Is there an element of intent that must be connected to that, even when there's a high casualty level, as in the Middle East conflict?
That question is a very challenging one. People are calling out the war in Gaza as genocide, and yet many of the people who are doing so, and I'm not saying they're wrong, I just want to make the point that they're doing so based on what they're reading, perhaps second or third hand from reporters who are not viewing evidentiary documentation. There has been no court proceeding with a definitive response to this. It would be like a charge of first-degree murder being levied against someone with no access to evidence and no access to a fair trial. So again, I'm concerned about the words that are being used. Innocent people have been brutally murdered, are starving. Conditions are horrific. I don't believe in putting labels on for any purpose at this point that is helpful. There are trials in process at the International Court of Justice, cases brought forward by South Africa and by Nicaragua. And there are a number of other countries who have signed on to the Africa case. I believe today the total is 32. And these cases will take a long time to adjudicate because it requires careful study of the evidence. It's not based on second or third hand reportage. And this is what the rule of law is all about: the gathering of evidence and the ability of the 15 judges at the International Court of Justice to make that decision. There are also charges pending at the International Criminal Court, and those are not based on a charge of genocide, but on charges of war crimes against both Hamas leaders and against Benjamin Netanyahu and Yoav Gallant from Israel. So the International Criminal Court prosecutes individuals for those human rights crimes. The International Court of Justice adjudicates cases between states, in this case for violating the Genocide Convention, for treaty violations.
So, Ellen, your organization is kind of a means to an end. We're hoping that one day there will be a world without genocide. What would that world look like?
Wouldn't it be wonderful? It would mean that resources can be shared. It would mean that people do not starve. It would mean that people who need assistance for health, for access to medical supplies, for shelter, would be able to receive that. It looks for a world with greater equity than certainly the world that we have today. And that's what I think many of us would envision. When the Universal Declaration of Human Rights was passed in 1948, and I want to note it was the day after the Genocide Convention was passed, the key word there is universal. It is the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. It's not just human rights for some. It is aspirational human rights for every one of us. And I truly believe in that. I get up every day believing in that. That if enough of us who work in human rights continue to push that difficult rock up that human rights mountain, someday perhaps the world will reach the top.
On that hopeful note and very stirring note, I'm afraid we've run out of time. But thank you for tuning into this episode of Disrupting Hate on HMTV. Many thanks to our guest, Ellen Kennedy, for sharing her insights. Be sure to subscribe, share, and stay connected for more engaging conversations. Until next time, take care and be well.